Good morning and welcome. We are in Senior English B, and this morning's lecture is an analysis and exegesis of the Wordsworth poem that we often will abbreviate to simply Tintern Abbey. The full title is there for you on page 784. Notice it's called Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey. Now, there's a lot that has to be said in the beginning to understand what you're reading. I want to, however, pause, and I want to say out loud the following. I feel an obligation with seniors to remind you of why we are here. And I need you to hear this for me, okay? While I'll be very happy by the end of May that you know a thing or two about British literature, and you will. I mean, you just will, inevitably, even if you just come and listen. You're going to know more than you knew before, but that's not really why I'm here. My goal is to help you become a better reader as you get ready for the university, college, or trade school, tech school experience that's coming. To improve your reading, I'm going to go through a daily process with you of learning how to read exegete. I'll do a lot of that by modeling, quite frankly, where I actually will read for you, not to you. That is to say, while I'm reading, you're following along, but you're kind of paying attention to the way that I read these texts. Let me say it this way. If you can read a poem like Tintern Abbey and figure out what's going on, you have no fear about reading a history book at the university level. Reading a history book will make, after this, will seem easy. Does that make sense? So as we read these poems, at first our instincts will be, dude, I have no idea what you just read. And then we go through a process of exegeting, and slowly you'll kind of start to figure out, oh, I get it. I understand how he's kind of breaking these lines down, trying to figure out what's being said. For those of you who are university bound, this is a crucial skill set. Dare I say it, it is the skill set. You have to be able to read if you're going to survive the university experience, right? Where you got all these books that you got to read, etc. So I will periodically remind you that that's really what we're doing as we get ready to work. Tintern Abbey, you can put it in your notes, is one of the more obscure and difficult poems that we will work with this year. But it's also one of the more important. And I'm happy that in Senior English B we actually get to begin here, because it's a poem I'm going to reference over and over again. We'll come back to it. And I'll spend a day tomorrow with this poem. The modus operandi, the way we will approach this poem, is not unlike the way we will do a number of other more difficult or esoteric poems. My process will be the following. One, I'll read it with you, just outright. We'll go from line 1 to the end. I'll just read it. I have some students that say, just after that, of having heard it read out loud, I begin to have a little better understanding of what's going on. Then we'll go back and we'll kind of break the lines up and we'll talk about them together, okay? And we'll kind of try to figure out what it is that Wordsworth is saying. Before I get to the reading, though, I want you to jot down one or two pieces of background that will help you understand this poem. First, Wordsworth is a great walker, and I mean physically, he likes to walk. One of the reasons he can get away with this is because he's a man of some means, wealth, so he doesn't have to work for a living. So this allows him to be able to go on what are called walking tours. That's to say, he actually gets up some morning and he leaves his house and he starts walking. And he carries his few necessaries on his back. He walks for a while until he gets into the countryside, till he gets to a hotel. And he stops. He checks in. He goes out for walks in the general environs, writes a few lines of poetry, comes back, has a nice evening meal with a glass of wine, gets up the next morning, walks a little bit further to the next hotel. He can do this for up to 2 years. Okay, he can do this for up to 2 years, all right? So he's doing these kinds of walks. At one point in his career, he has left England, and a very sacred spot in England. I'll show you images of this tomorrow, actually. It's a place that you can visit in South England, where there's this old, dilapidated cathedral. We would call it a cathedral. He calls it an abbey, a church building. Okay? The area is called Tintern Abbey. Okay, and it kind of sits out in this meadow with these woods next to it and these little mountains. And there's this river that runs right next to it called the River Wye. We'll see this river in a moment. It'll be mentioned in this poem. Wordsworth has been gone for 5 years. This is huge for your notes. You're not going to understand this poem if you don't understand this. Wordsworth's been gone for 5 years from this location. And he comes back to it along with his sister, who's a very close friend of his named Dorothy. That's his sister's name. He and Dorothy's much younger than him, but Dorothy comes with him when he comes back to visit 5 years later, Tintern Abbey. One of the stories that works well to kind of give you a sense of what this is like is a student of mine who'd grown up all his life in Worland. In fact, he reported that he didn't leave Worland for very much other than to, ball trips because he was a ball player. And after high school, he went on Rotary Exchange for a year overseas. It was his first time to travel overseas. But then once he was over there after the Rotary Exchange, because he had already graduated from high school, he elected to stay on overseas for 2 more years. That's 3 years he's been gone from Worland. He hasn't been back at all. And he was telling me about his return, how he landed in Denver, got in a car because somebody from Worland picked him up, and he started driving back towards Worland. And he said the strangest feelings started to happen right about Casper, because he'd grown up in this state playing ball for high school, and he traveled a lot. And so right about the time he hit Casper, he said he got this weird kind of reminiscence of, oh yeah, this road. Oh yeah, the road from Casper to Shoshone. Oh yeah. See, he's been gone for 3 years. But then he said going through that canyon was even more weird, because he'd done that a lot from the time he was a little child on. But he said his most powerful feelings of memories were when he hit Thermopolis. Because once he hit Thermopolis, he had done that drive back and forth so often that he knew the topography, he knew the landscape. So as he came over the hill, he said, towards Worland, and this was in the winter, and he saw those 2 smokestacks of the sugar factory, right? The big towers of the sugar outside of Worland. He said it was weird how all of a sudden a place that I had loathed growing up, the place that I had longed to escape from, right, and had been gone for 3 years, he said all of a sudden it had a different kind of feeling for me coming back to it, because I was older and things had happened and I'd been gone 3 years. And then he said, interestingly, I was reminded of that poem that we did called Tintern Abbey, where that guy's gone for 5 years from the spot that he loves very much, and then he comes back to it. That's right. So that's Wordsworth. He's coming back to this Tintern Abbey spot, and he's going to write about this spot now, and he's going to write about what it means to him. Through the course of the poem, he's going to outline the ways he's changed or gotten older. That'll be insignificant. You might want to write that one down as well in your notes as well. This is a poem about getting older, which is, of course, interesting because seniors don't think of themselves as old until they go home and look in their annual at what they look like when they were freshmen. And then all of a sudden it hits them. Oh yeah, that's not me. But it is me, but it's not me. Or if you live in a house where you're cursed to have your mother or whoever likes to hang pictures up from your 3rd grade, you get to know when you look at those pictures immediately, well, that is me, but in some weird way it's not me either. I've changed a lot or whatever. Okay? That's kind of the heart of this poem. Well, finally say this. This is a poetic essay. This you want to write down. This is a poetic essay. It's like reading an essay where we have a series of paragraphs. We'll call them stanzas. And about each one of these stanzas, paragraphs, we're going to ask, what is the main point that he's making? By the end of the poem, he will turn his focus away from himself and the area of Tintern Abbey to his sister Dorothy. The final line stanzas of this poem are spoken directly to his sister Dorothy. Without understanding that, by the way, a lot of this poem just does not make much sense. Got me? By the way, there is a facsimile pictured there, a little painting on 785 for you. We will look at real images. You can still visit this place today and the cows that eat in the meadow right next to the old abandoned abbey. And it's still, of course, an old abandoned abbey. It was an abandoned abbey in 1800 when Wordsworth was visiting it, okay, from many years before. And for those of you that have been to Europe, you know this is true. These old cathedrals, many of them are in real dilapidated stages, okay, but they still are quite remarkable structures. I mean, you still look at them and go, whoa, how did they figure out how to build something like that? All right, here we go. Lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey. We'll read it together. Don't just brain drain and don't just listen to me read this. You'll do yourself great service if you literally follow along. Some of you will do it with your pen tip or pencil tip, following word by word. If you can't keep up with my rhythm of reading this poem, then you know you've got some reading issues that you need to improve on in terms of reading speed. On the other hand, if you can stay up with me in the reading of this poem, then you know in terms of your reading speed, you're okay. You're doing all right. Let's take a look at it now. Lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey. 5 years have passed. 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters. And again I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a soft inland murmur. Once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs that on a wild, secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The day is come when I again repose here under this dark sycamore and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at this season with their unripe fruits are clad in one green hue and lose themselves mid groves and copses. Once again I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild, these pastoral farms green to the very door, and wreaths of smoke sent up in silence from among the trees, with some uncertain notice, as might seem of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods, or of some hermit's cave where by his fire the hermit sits alone. These beauteous forms, through a long absence, have not been to me, as is a landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft in lonely rooms and mid the din of towns and cities I've owed to them in hours of weariness sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration. Feelings, too, of unremembered pleasure, such perhaps as have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. Nor less I trust to them I may have owed another gift of aspect more sublime, that blessed mood in which the burthen of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened, that serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on, until the breath of this corporal frame and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. If this be but a vain belief, yet how oft in darkness, and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir unprofitable, and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, how oft in spirit have I turned to thee, O sylvan why, thou wanderer through the woods, how often has my spirit turned to thee? And now, with gleams of half-extinguished thought, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity, the picture of the mind revives again, while here I stand, not only with a sense of present pleasure, but with pleasing thoughts that in this moment there is life and food for future years. And so I dare to hope. Though changed no doubt from what I was when first I came among these hills, when like a roe I bounded o'er the mountains by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams, wherever nature led, more like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. For nature then, the coarser pleasures of my boyish days and their glad animal movements all gone by, to me was all in all. I cannot paint what then I was. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, the deep and gloomy wood, their colors and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling and a love that had no need of a remoter charm by thought supplied, nor any interest borrowed from the eye. That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures, not for this faint eye, nor mourn, nor murmur. Other gifts have followed. For such loss I would believe abundant recompense. For I have learned to look on nature, not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still, sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky. And in the mind of man, a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. Therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods and mountains, and all that we behold from this green earth, of all the mighty world of eye and ear, both what they have create and what perceive, well pleased to recognize in nature and the language of the sense the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart and soul of all my moral being. Nor, perchance, if I were not thus taught, should I the more suffer my genial spirits to decay. For thou art with me here upon the banks of this fair river, thou, my dearest friend, my dear, dear friend. And in thy voice I catch the language of my former heart, and read my former pleasures in the shooting lights of thy wild eyes. Oh, yet a little while may I behold in thee what I was once, my dear, dear sister. And this prayer I make, knowing that nature never did betray the heart that loved her. 'Tis her privilege, through all the years of this our life, to lead from joy to joy. For she can so inform the mind that is within us, so impress with quietness and beauty, and so feed with lofty thoughts, that neither evil tongues, rash judgments, nor the sneers of selfish men, nor greetings where no kindness is, nor all the dreary intercourse of daily life shall e'er prevail against us or disturb our cheerful faith that all which we behold is full of blessings. Therefore let the moon shine on thee in thy solitary walk, and let the misty mountain winds be free to blow against thee. And in after years, when these wild ecstasies shall be matured into a sober pleasure, when thy mind shall be a mansion for all lovely forms, thy memory be a dwelling place for all sweet sounds and harmonies, oh then, if solitude or fear or pain or grief should be thy portion, with what healing thoughts of tender joy wilt thou remember me and these my exhortations? Nor perchance, if I should be where I no more can hear thy voice, nor catch from thy wild eyes these gleams of past existence, wilt thou then forget that on the banks of this delightful stream we stood together, and that I, so long a worshipper of nature, hither came unwearied in that service, rather say with warmer love, oh, with far deeper zeal of holier love. Nor wilt thou then forget that after many wanderings, many years of absence, these steep woods and lofty cliffs and this green pastoral landscape were to me more dear, both for themselves and for thy sake. Now, it is not unusual for a student at the high school level to read a poem like this or to have it read for the student and to immediately report, dude, you could have been standing up there in front of me going, and it would have meant just as much. Just as much. And I will often report back, I get it, I totally get it. Like I said to you, this is no easy poem. But I think the process of exegeting, the process of reading and interpreting, can be very empowering of a poem like this. In other words, by the end of this poem, and our study of it, as late as tomorrow, you will have a much better sense of what's going on in this poem. And ultimately, in fact, you will report, you know, this is actually not that difficult a poem once you kind of understand what's going on. So let's begin the process. We'll work right up till the end of the hour, and then of course we'll pick up again tomorrow, right at the top of the hour. You will want all of your time with me tomorrow so that we can be sure that we finish and make some final summative comments on Wordsworth as well on Friday. Let's begin by reaffirming what I said before. This poem is what we will call a poetic essay. There will be paragraphs, only we don't call them paragraphs, we call them stanzas. And in each one of these stanzas, Wordsworth will be building an argument, an important argument, one that we will now, for your notes, call a romantic argument. In fact, this is the poem of the Romantic period. This is the poem of 1800 and the English Romantic period. Mr. Brown, if you need any single poem that represents what we mean when we talk about English Romanticism, it is this poem. There are few poems in the English literary tradition more important and influential than this poem. Go back to what we said yesterday. Wordsworth said in Lyrical Ballads was so important to him. Language that was simple. Now, for those of you that say, dude, this isn't simple language for me, you're not living in 1800. For someone living in 1800, this is incredibly simple language. Notice we said yesterday he's going to work with very simple ideas. A return back to a place where he once enjoyed being 5 years earlier. Pretty simple. By the way, this is what we call a poem of place, geography. We could ask you, what up to this point in your life, a 3B observation question, what up to this point in your life is a geographic spot to which you like to return if you are in need of solace? For some of us, it's the Badlands. For some of us, it's the mountains. For some of us, it's a room in our house. For some of us, it's a room some other place, right? It is a place where we feel comforted when we come back. This will be where Wordsworth will return. But notice what we said from Lyrical Ballads. He begins with something simple. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. But by the end of the poem, he's making some interesting and deeply challenging philosophic observations. The child is father of the man. That's not an easy idea to understand. So, in this poem as well, notice, we're going to begin with really simple descriptors. In the first stanza, that's the lines of 784, roughly lines 1 through 22. He's simply going to introduce us to where it is he is. He is going to describe for us the region, the area around Tintern Abbey. Make a note for your notes. As a poet, Wordsworth will solicit and elicit all 5 senses. If we had more time, we would do this. Where, for example, we would say, in these first 23 lines, what does he see? What does he hear? What does he touch? What does he taste? What does he smell? And on it goes. So the 5 senses, right? Notice he begins by telling us it's been 5 years. Notice he will tell us that they've passed 5 summers with the length of what? 5 long winters. He's been gone a long time. It's been a while since he's been back to this spot. And notice, again, starting with the senses, he can hear waters rolling. By the way, I was talking with a pal of mine who lectures back east, and he said, how do you live out there in the west, in the middle of nowhere, with 3 whole stoplights, this kind of thing. You have no theater, etc., and no restaurants. I think A&W is kind of a restaurant. And I said, no, you don't understand. There are things I can teach in Wyoming that you can't teach back where you're from. Because your students don't understand what we're talking about. I do this all the time. He's like, give me an example. I said, Tintern Abbey, a perfect example. See, we live where we get to see much of what it is he's describing. For example, if even as a child you can remember sitting next to Tinsley Creek, if you sit there long enough and still enough, you actually begin to kind of feel like there is some kind of pulse beating in that creek by virtue of the water running over those rocks. And if you've listened long enough, there's strange sounds, aren't there, that involve the rocks being moved from the force of the creek. Of course, if you fish in any of these streams, you know it very well, don't you? Because you've spent hours standing in the middle of a stream. See, I can explain that to someone who's done that, and they go, I get it, as he talks about the murmur of a river, or the murmur of a creek, the sound of a creek. Well, if you haven't been around creeks, you kind of laugh about this. Yeah, right, it's just water. What, are you kidding me? No, there's a whole lot going on in a creek in terms of what you can hear and what you can see, etc., etc. So notice that he begins by saying the place is secluded. He hears the water, the murmuring, and all of this for him is what? What's the mood of the poem at the beginning? Write it down in your notes. Does it agitate him? Does it anger him? Does it sadden him? Or rather, does it give him a certain kind of peace? The English divide up their land by hedges. They don't use barbed wire because they didn't do it that way. So we'll come back tomorrow and I'll show you some pictures of Tintern Abbey and we'll begin there. Thank you.